he did have some admissions today. I mentioned some of them, but as you were watching, what was the starkest substantive admission or concession that the former president made?
Well, you mentioned at least two of them. One is that he was involved in various statements and in providing information about valuations. And the other, the financial statements were made for the purpose of inducing lenders to lend, right? So you have a basis for finding that he had, what lawyers call mens rea, the intent to engage in fabrication and an overstatement, and also what the purpose of those statements was. He said that multiple times during the course of his testimony, which again, to me, is a function of both hubris and their plan to persuade the court of public opinion, and within that court of public opinion, the subset of people who are his supporters, not the court of law itself.
Everything ended a little bit earlier than we expected today. I mean, we're all waiting for maybe 4:30 or something like that. It ended earlier because his lawyers decided not to cross-examine him. What did you make of that strategy?
That's unusual. I mean, usually it's the case that when you have the hostile party examining your witness, your client, the person who's the defendant in the case, you then want to sort of clean up some of the things that were said before. You ask a lot of questions that allow your client, in this case Donald Trump, to modify the things he said, to improve the things he said. So, maybe it's an act of bravado, because sometimes somebody will say, I have no questions because we think our client did as well as he possibly could. And it's signaling to a jury, if there's a jury, there's no jury in this matter, as we know, but signaling to the judge that we thought that our guy did great. I mean, look, there are multiple times during the course of the trial today, during the course of Trump's testimony, that the judge said, can you control your client? And can you do something about this? And the lawyers, speaking to an audience of one, their client, the defendant in the case, said things like, he's giving great answers. They referred to him as not only the former president, but also the future chief executive of the country. They were just coddling him, and I think they thought that for public purposes, the spectacle that was Donald Trump's testimony stood on its own and was fine enough.
It seemed like these lawyers were participating in a political strategy, not a legal strategy, right? I mean, they agreed to this, according to Rolling Stone and others, were you surprised by that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's mostly a political strategy, and Donald Trump calls the shots. He probably dictates some of the things that they say. These are loyalists to him. The only sort of legal strategy that I can discern here that people have been speculating about is, to the extent that Donald Trump is being outrageous and provocative and attacking of the judge, was there some strategy to goad the judge into doing something that might be reversible error, or get so angry that he might do something extreme which might help him on appeal? That's a theory that people have been debating on cable television all day and will probably for the rest of the week. I'm not sure that's true. That's probably an incidental potential benefit of Trump acting outrageously. He believes when he acts in his life that he's always at a political rally, whether it's on a cable news station or in a court of law or an actual political rally. I think he can't help being himself. So it's not clear to me how much legal strategy is here as opposed to political strategy.
And there's clearly a lot of judges, a lot of prosecutors who are watching today. And one of the things that still hangs in the balance out there, one of the many, is this question of his appeal over gag orders. He just attacked a judge, he attacked the Attorney General of New York. How do you think that plays out, or does it, on his gag order appeal in the federal case?
Well, it's very fascinating that people are talking about how much of a wide berth or not Donald Trump has been getting. So we could talk about a gag order in this case, and there's a second case in which there's a gag order, a criminal case. They're very limited. I mean, you have here a gag order in the New York civil case that mostly applies to judicial staff and now the lawyers of the President of the United States, former President of the United States. But he's allowing the defendant in a case, a party in a case, to specifically attack the judge himself in the case again and again and again. So I think the other judges in the 4 criminal cases, one of whom has already issued a limited gag order, are going to be looking very carefully at the way in which you control your courtroom and control Donald Trump. At one point, one of Donald Trump's lawyers said today to the judge, you don't control me. You can't tell me what to do. You control the courtroom. For people who actually practice in court, that's a subtle distinction that is not understandable.
No, that's true. Watching this, obviously criminal trials are entirely different, but what did today tell you, or what should it tell all of us about how Trump is likely going to approach his upcoming criminal trials? Can he do the same kind of crazy behavior that he did today in criminal trials?
I think it's a much different animal. In a civil case, you can take the fifth and you can decide not to testify because it might incriminate you with respect to some other criminal investigation. But if you do that, the judge can draw an adverse inference against you. And the judge said today, when Trump wasn't answering questions in a direct fashion, he said, I'm going to make adverse inferences. In other words, assume that the facts are bad for you based on the fact that you're not answering questions. In a criminal case, it behooves someone who is actually guilty and who can't testify credibly and who would be cross-examined by the prosecution in a case like that, not to testify. So I think Donald Trump does not have the ability to testify in a criminal case because I think he'll be chewed up on cross-examination and it will be more likely to be found guilty if he does in that circumstance.
Before I let you go, I do have to ask you about this, what I found to be a completely crazy story in the Washington Post. I've read it 3 times and I can't stop thinking about it, which basically outlines, and it was kind of overshadowed by everything today, to be honest. It basically outlines the plan that Trump and his allies have to use the federal government to punish critics and opponents if he wins a second term. They're drafting plans. They're talking about invoking the Insurrection Act. Reading that, what did you think? What concerns you the most about what you saw in that story?
So it's, bonkers. I'm not sure what words to apply to the things that are said in that article and the way it's characterizing Donald Trump's plans. I seldom curse on Twitter. I did a couple of hours ago in response to the article. It's ironic that Donald Trump says things about his current legal predicament, including with respect to the case we've been talking about, that it's a banana republic. It's not. The things that are being talked about, if you believe the article to be true and the reporting to be accurate and correct, that Donald Trump is specifically wanting to weaponize his next attorney general if he gets back into the presidency and all the people under him to specifically go after not only political enemies of his, but people who he employed who have been disloyal to him without any evidence, without any basis at all. That's the banana republic. And so I think if people should, read the article. I read it twice and I can't stop thinking about it. You read it 3 times. People should read it at least once and understand that the consequences for the rule of law and for democracy and for justice in America and one standard of justice in America, if Trump becomes the president again, will be a thing of the past.